This is The Clash, where the real world clashes with a true Christian worldview. Join former professional wrestler Chris Whaley, known as the Masked Saint, who is an author, pastor, and teacher that brings his wrestling skills into the squared circle and tackles real-life issues. Along with Jeff Dixon, best-selling author, internationally known teacher, leader, and pastor who is not afraid to tackle the tough issues of the world we live in. Together they form a tag team of wisdom in The Clash.
Hi, and welcome to The Clash, where we take a Christian worldview and allow it to clash into the culture around us. And along the way, we hope that we entertain you just a little bit, maybe educate you a little bit, stretch you, and challenge you just a little bit. And if it goes well, we all have a great time together. I'm Jeff Dixon. I am one of the hosts of this show, but the real star of this broadcast is none other than the saint himself, the one, the only Chris Whaley. How you doing, Chris?
You're just too kind to me, you know that?
Well, you pay me.
You really are. Hey, man, I'm excited about today. I tell you, I was going to be interviewed by a guy in Cincinnati, and anytime I'm interviewed, I want to listen to their show to see how they do it. And the show that I listened to was an interview with movie director Rick Pamplin, and he had a movie coming out called Burt Reynolds, The Last Interview, and I was just captivated by this interview. And I couldn't get enough of it because I'm a big Burt Reynolds fan. When I did the interview, I asked the guy, I said, can I get the contact info for your previous guest, Rick Pamplin? And he passed it on to me. And so I got in touch with Rick Pamplin and have since, I think, become good friends with him. He's one of the most fascinating people in the movie industry because he's normal.
Nice.
He is a normal guy, and he's a great guy. And you're going to find out all about Rick Pamplin in this interview. Rick, it is so great to have you on our show.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Congratulations on the show. And I'm very honored to be here.
Well, thank you. You know, you started your career as an award-winning journalist with CBS News in Michigan before moving to Hollywood. So Rick, what inspired that transition from journalism to screenwriting to directing?
Well, I think that my goal as a young person, very ill, in the hospital a lot, and being told I wasn't going to live to be 20. And I immersed myself into movies, television, all of that stuff, and said, if I ever get out of this hospital bed, if I live, I want to go to Hollywood. I want to make movies. And every single person in my life in Michigan as a child, every educator, every girlfriend, every male friend, my pastor laughed at me. Well, you can't do that. People like you just can't go to Hollywood and make movies. And one of the things I hope we accomplish today, and I hope we accomplish it in saying it in a polite way, but if you follow Jesus Christ and you believe in God, anything is possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No doubt.
And I developed a relationship with God in that hospital bed and with Jesus. And I could tell you great things about what happened there, but I believed that I could survive that I could go make motion pictures. And, when I got out, I became an acolyte in the church. I taught summer church Sunday school because I was too young to teach regular Sunday school, and I became very determined that I would be a pastor. That was going to be my calling in life. But there was a gentleman who was our pastor of our church, which was Lutheran, who was very discouraging to me. And all of the things that I observed while working within the church, sometimes churches are the biggest enemies of Christians or believers or people who want to follow Jesus.
Sadly.
And so I became very concerned about the starvation of children in Bangladesh. So one day I went into our pastor, into his office, and he put his feet up on his desk and, did his pipe and started smoking. And what's on your mind, Rick? What is it you want to talk about? I said, we come and we sing and you give a sermon, but we're not connecting with people that need us. We're not in the community. I just think that if you take what Jesus said and if you apply it, we should care about the children starving in Bangladesh. We should care about people starving in our community. We should connect more. And the church was in a rich suburb of Flint, Michigan, which was a very prosperous town at the time, a General Motors town. And he said to me, sitting there with his feet, and smoking his pipe, you ought to be out throwing a football, chasing girls. You shouldn't worry about things like that. And I said to him, and this changed my life, the Jesus I follow wouldn't want me chasing women and throwing a football. And I have no interest in that. I have interest in following Jesus and making a better world. And he laughed and he was dismissive. He's still a huge person in organized religion. And it started an estrangement with me that a lot of people who believe sincerely in Jesus or in God and want to follow them just can't connect through some of the organized religion. And I spent my whole life struggling with this. So I ended up, my parents got divorced. My mother had a nervous breakdown and went to a psychiatric thing, and they sent me off to military school. And I was on heavy prescription drugs and, all these letters from doctors went to the military school. He can't march. He can't do military thing. He can't play sports, blah, blah, blah. And they gave me a wood desk and there was a glass on top of it. And I remember sitting there praying to God as I found some matches and I burned all of the letters that said I couldn't play sports, I couldn't participate in military activities. In other words, I couldn't live a normal life. And my mother had sent 2 DOP kits with me, one with my prescription drugs and one with my toiletries. And we had a communal bathroom, and I went down in the middle of the night and I opened up all those pill bottles and I poured all those prescription drugs down the toilet, and I keep flushing until they all went away. And I honestly believed I would live for maybe 2 months and I would die. But at least I was going to go outside and play sports and be normal and live a life. Because everybody else had abandoned me. Nobody wanted me, and I was sent to military school. And so after about 2 months, I lost a bunch of weight. Girls started liking me. I didn't do anything. And I was in the military, and I was in playing football. And I got healthier and happier. And I was like, everything everybody ever told me in my lifetime was wrong. And I was like on my own completely. And I just developed that personality that no human's judgment or traditional advice meant anything to me. So I eventually, after 2 years, I was a plebe and was abused physically and all that stuff that they do in the military. And I became an officer, which I didn't like, and I wouldn't participate in abusing the other cadets. So I just thought, I've accomplished what I wanted to accomplish here. I'm done. So I ran away to hitchhike to Hollywood. This was in my junior year. And I took the colonel's son with me. So we started hitchhiking, and we slept in ditches, and we had a couple rules. We wouldn't steal, and we wouldn't beg. And we did day jobs, and we kind of started working our way across the country. We didn't get very far. We got to St. Louis, but we were on our own, and I was going to Hollywood at, I guess, age 16 or whatever to make movies. And eventually they caught us, and we had to go back, and I had to go in the stalls of the horses where the troop was, cadets that were in the cavalry. And I had to shovel every day the horse. And I didn't care. I did it with a smile on my face. And people would say, well, you're being punished. Why are you happy? I said, because I'm leaving this place. They're not going to let me come back. I'm done. I'll take my punishment. So the next year I went to a prep school, and then ultimately I connected with some people. I worked in a political campaign. I traveled all over the country. And in that experience, I met a lot of people. And so I accidentally enrolled in college. I didn't really want to go to college. My mother had gotten out and was back functioning in the real world. And she was a school teacher, wanted me to go to college. So I went to college for the first semester, and then she and I didn't agree on some things. And so she cut off my funding, and I was working while I was there. So I ended up homeless again, which is kind of a motif in my life. And I ended up going to my father, who had abandoned me, and I hadn't seen him for 7 years. And I got a job delivering newspapers for the Detroit Free Press. So I'd go out in the middle of the night and I'd deliver newspapers, and I would go collect money from the newspaper boys during the day, and I would put the newspapers in the racks. And I really wanted to get in the movie business. I had no idea. I read the paper every day, and there was a critic named Susan Stark in Detroit. And she was a great film critic and wrote about film and all this stuff. So I called her up one day and I said, "This is Rick Pamplin." I said, "I work for the Free Press. I need to meet with you." And she said, "What's this about?" I said, "I can't tell you over the phone." "What time are you available?" So she made this appointment with me, not knowing who I was. And I drove from Flint, Michigan down to Detroit. And I walked in her office. I was, 19, 20 years old. And she goes, "What is this? Who are you?" And I said, "Well, I want to be a filmmaker and I don't know how to do it." And she just thought it was hysterical. And she sat with me for about 3 hours, gave me the greatest advice ever. The first of which is, you got to go to Hollywood, And I said, "Well, can I do something here? I mean, I'm sort of like, delivering newspapers at 3 a.m. I'm not exactly, set up." And she said, "Find a local newspaper and write a review of a movie and mail it to them unsolicited." And people always say to me, "How did you get in the movie business?" Well, this is kind of how I did it. So I went out and I saw this movie called The Heartbreak Kid with Sybil Shepherd and Charles Grodin. And I loved it. I thought it was hilarious. So I wrote a review, and I found a weekly newspaper called the Grand Blanc Evening News, and I mailed it to them. And about a week later, people started calling me saying, "There's a movie review in the newspaper. Your name is on it." So they had published it and everything. So I called up the editor and I said, "I really appreciate you publishing." She said, "Oh my God, you're great. Could you write some more?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "Go see every movie." She said, I'll pay you back whatever it costs. You're great. Everybody loved your review. You're our movie critic. So I'm working for the Detroit Free Press all night. And then during the day, I'm going to movies, and then I'm writing reviews. So after about 6 or 7 of these reviews got published, I called her up and I said, her name is Kathy, and she was a wonderful person. And I said, "Aren't you supposed to pay me for writing these?" And she said, "Could you come in the office? We want to meet you." I'm like, "Okay." So I go in the office at Grand Blanc Evening News, which is a very prosperous, very well, little weekly newspaper. And she said, "Our arts editor just got a big job and got transferred out of state. Would you like to be the arts editor of the newspaper?" I was like, "Okay." So they gave me a full-time job, and they actually created one of those entertainment supplements that I was the editor of, with the TV listings and the movies and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. They were paying me some ridiculously low, like $125 a week and all my expenses. And I was like, I thought I'd hit, the goal. And then people are calling up saying, "Would you interview this movie star who's coming on a tour for their movie?" And I was like, "Okay." And then they were like, "Would you come down to Detroit? Burt Reynolds has a new movie, The Man Who Loved Cat Dancing. we'd like you to come see Burt's movie and meet some of the people who worked on the movie. I says, Burt going to be there? Well, he's supposed to, but we don't know. Then he turned out he wasn't. There's a long story why. But anyway, so I drove to Detroit to meet Burt Reynolds back in, whenever this was, like early 70s. So to try to condense down the story, I became a very popular writer. So a CBS TV station opened in Flint, Saginaw, Bay City, Michigan. And they built this incredible studio and all this stuff. And so they wanted me to go do an interview. And I was, I don't want to do that. Most everything I'm ever offered, I never want to do. And then the things that I finally do seem to work out. So I went up to this TV station and I interviewed the programming director and the news guy. And, and I really wasn't interested in TV. I was a movie guy. And so the guy that was the program director had a Porsche car, brand new Porsche. And I'd always, as a kid, wanted to drive a Porsche. I'd never seen one before. And I was like, wow. So he said, you ought to be on the air. You're very colorful. You should be on television. And I said, no, I'm a movie guy. I'm going to Hollywood. I don't have time for this. And sometimes in life, when you say no, the deal gets sweetened. So then they called up and they're like, what are you making? And I told them, well, we'll double that. Okay. And we'll give you a free car. And they just kept upping the deal. And so I finally called the programming director. His name was Paul Barry. He's a great guy. He's from Georgia. And he said, what's it going to take? I want you on this TV station. We need you. Of all the people I've met, you're the most interesting. I want to make you a newsman and let you do interviews and talk shows and all that. So I said, if you'll let me drive your car, we'll go to lunch, but you got to let me drive your Porsche. I'll do it. So I went up to the TV station and I drove his Porsche and we went to lunch, and that's how I became a TV newsman for CBS News. So it was a great experience. I worked with Walter Cronkite. I did stuff that was on the CBS Evening News and the CBS Morning News with Hughes Rudd. I got paid by CBS, which at that time was unbelievable. They paid $15 an hour, like the most money I'd ever seen in my life. My father was a postman, and the most money he ever made was like $10,000. And he told me one time that if I kept my nose clean and I listened to him, then I could someday make money like that. But I was more ambitious. So it was a great experience. And so they would try to corrupt the news, kind of like a prelude to what they do now. The stuff the stuff you see on television is bought and sold propaganda. Yeah. It's either political, it's commercial, it's whatever. So I got, like, for example, they would start selling gold. And then they would say to me, well, you have to go interview this guy because he's buying ads. And I'd go interview his competitor. And then they'd say, well, grocery prices, you got to go do this. And I'd go do I wouldn't let them dictate the news to me. So we fought for about a year and a half. And then one day they fired me. So I had made a thing that I was going to go to University of Michigan, Flint, and I was going to be interviewed by some journalism students. And so I forgot about it. And the guy called me up. Professor Greg Waters was his name. And Greg said, Rick, I want to confirm. Oh, no, you don't want me, Greg. They fired me. And he goes, well, then it'll be more interesting. You must come. The kids all want to meet you. Would you please come and meet the kids? I'm a kid too. And I'm like, okay. So I went and I did the journalism class, and he took me out to lunch. And he was one of the most decent guys ever. And he said, why don't you clean up your act? Why don't you go back to school? Why don't you get your college degree? I'll give you a paying job as the editor of the University of Michigan newspaper. You can have offices and a staff and a budget, and your school will be free, and you would be dynamic. So I did that for a year, and we won third best paper in the state. Michael Moore, by the way, worked for me. He was one of my writers. And we did real journalism, and the paper won all these awards, and it was just a terrific experience. So after the first year, the university basically was closed for summer. There was no newspaper. So I had these offices and nothing to do. And this guy called me up to hire me to make a pornographic movie. And I was like, how did you get my name? And he goes, oh, well, I called the University of Michigan theater department, and they said there's only one guy, hire Rick to make a movie. And I said, I don't make porn. Why do you want to make a porn? Well, that's where the money. I said, I don't want anything to do with it. And so he talked me into coming by and taking me to dinner one night. And so we became kind of friendly, and he never made his movie, but he went to Hollywood. He just went to Hollywood. And so I called up his father, his old phone number in Flint, and the guy answered. His name was Bob. And I said, I'm trying to reach Bob Jr. And he goes, no, this is Bob. Rick, is that you? I said, yeah. I said, what happened? He said, I ran out of money and I had to come home. But he said, I'm going back to Hollywood in about a week. And I go, I'm going with you. He said, what do you mean? I said, I'll pay half the expenses. You know, I'll pay for the gas, the food, or whatever. He goes, well, you're in. So in June of 1976, we drove across the country and we went to Hollywood. Accidentally, I move in next door to a guy named Sylvester Stallone. Nobody's ever heard of. So the manager of this apartment building was a stunt man his name was Chuck Palahniuk, for Errol Flynn. So he knew all the old stars and Barbara Stanwyck and all this stuff. And he introduced me to Stallone. I call him Stallone. And Stallone comes up to me one day. I was at the pool. He's about 50 pounds overweight. He's in a yellow cotton T-shirt and day glow green shorts. His hair is part of the middle. And he hadn't had plastic surgery. He drooled out of the left side of his mouth. He goes, yeah, I got this little low budget fight film. You want to come see it? So he invited everybody in the apartment building to go see Rocky. And only my friend, Bob, and I went to see it. And of course, the next day I'm over knocking on his door. I'm like, Sly, it's a masterpiece. It's a great film. You've made this great movie. And he goes, don't tease me. You know, because everybody was telling him how bad the film was. And I loved Rocky. So I spent a lot of time. I interviewed him for magazines. We hung out. He was my neighbor. I worked on a picture called Fist. He got me the thing with Fist. And I got to work with he and Rod Steiger. And I worked on Rocky II, a whole bunch of his movies. And, you know, he was kind of my introduction, you know, to Hollywood. And then, you know, I studied acting. I was under the illusion I wanted to act with Lee Strasberg, and I took writing classes. And, you know, I eventually graduated, couldn't get a job, you know, and finally got a job at a magazine because that's what I'd kind of done in Michigan. And then eventually, you know, was running this magazine, made a lot of money, but then went back in the movie business, failed miserably, and lived in my car for 90 days.
Well, Rick, I did not know about the Rocky connection you had, and I'm a huge Stallone fan, huge Rocky fan. He's your neighbor sort of now in South Florida, right? I mean,
yeah, his neighborhood's a little pricier than mine.
Oh, is it? I was going to say, does he let you come by, or does he lock you out of the neighborhood?
No, he's down here. He's very involved, and in fact, I'm working on a picture now that I'm going to offer him a part, probably a small part, but yeah, he's been a blessing. I mean, the odds of moving in next door to Sylvester Stallone 6 months before Rocky came out. I mean, it was just, you know.
Well, I mean, his life is an amazing life too. I mean, he's that ultimate warrior, and you hear those stories, and of course, you know, he's got longevity in Hollywood. I mean, he's survived it, and it's fascinating.
Think of the Rocky,
he's an amazing
Rambo.
character. I also worked with his brother Frank. I worked with his father. I worked with his mother in Las Vegas on a TV show called Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. Yeah. The original one, which his mother was one of the managers of the Bad Girls. Sure. And I know the family well. I have nothing but love and praise of Sylvester.
Sure.
That's great.
Now, you just mentioned Glow, Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. You know, you I believe you wrote and directed some of those episodes and kind of was a guiding force in that. Tell us a little bit about how you got into that.
Well, like all of these weird stories, you meet. So I had an office building, and I always went to the restroom on the second floor. But one day I was going to a meeting, and I started to go out the side door, and I thought, I got to go to the bathroom. I better go here. So I went for the first time in the first floor bathroom. So I go up to a urinal, and there's a guy in a running suit smoking a cigar. This Italian guy, very Italian. And he goes, "Hey, who are you? What do you do?" I said, "Well, I write movies, I direct, I just made a little film." And he goes, "Yeah, I just got back from the Cannes Film Festival." And he says, "You got any samples of your work?" He said, "I'm doing a movie with Glenda Jackson and Elizabeth Taylor at Orion." He said, "If you want to be a director," he says, "I may even want to, use you as a writer." He said, "I'm always looking for young guys." He says, I said, "Well, I'll call my secretary. Where's your office out here?" And he told me. I said, "I'll send you a sample script and the video of my new film," which we had VHS in those days. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't think much about it. I went to lunch. I came back, and Betty, my secretary, said, "This guy's called like 10 times. He really wants to talk to you." Okay. So we set up a meeting for the next day. And he said, "I read your script and I saw your movie and you're really great. Come with me. Let's go to lunch." So he took me to Hamburger Hamlet up on Sunset. And Don Siegel was there, who directed Dirty Harry and a bunch of Clint Eastwood movies. And I was a huge fan. And these guys were friends. So we're like, he's introducing me to all these people and celebrities. And we're eating at Hamburger Hamlet. And I'm like, wow, okay. So we go to this meeting in Orion. And I don't want to get into the particulars, but Glenda Jackson and Elizabeth Taylor didn't really get along. So the movie didn't, if your two stars don't get along, when we had Chris in my new movie, we had to fire several people because they weren't going to work with Chris. So, I wanted Chris.
No, I understand. I understand that. Yeah, I got you. So.
The bigger the star, the more they have influence.
No doubt. No doubt.
So that fell apart. And I thought it was a great experience. Thanks for the lunch. And I'm going back up to my little, school. And I go downstairs one day and he goes, Pamplin, come here. I said, "Yeah." He goes, "We're going to Vegas. We're leaving Friday, a wrestling show." And I was like, "What?" No, you're going to work on it. I'm not going to do a wrestling show. What are you talking about? No, it's going to be girls, all cute girls. You're going to have fun. I was like, "I know." So this went on for about 2 or 3 days, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So he says, "You got to come over to my office." And so he came over and he had a couple of the really cute girls there. And they were trying to get me to come to Vegas and do the show and the whole thing. And I was like, "No, I don't want to do a wrestling show. I don't want to go to Vegas. I'm in Hollywood. What do I want to go there for?" And so then he made me an offer. And I went, "No, that's ridiculous. That's too little money. It's ridiculous. I'd forget it." So then he goes, "Well, I'll double it. I'll give you a writer's salary and a director's salary. But I'm the director, but you're going to do most of the directing. You can be like the first AD or whatever." And I was like, I don't think so. So the more I turned it down, the better. Then I got a suite. Then I got an expense account. They kept pouring it on. So on Friday, I drove to Las Vegas for the first time in my life, checked in the Riviera Hotel. And the next day I went to a meeting and we met with the president of the hotel. And so anyway, so that's how I cast the show. I wrote what they called, please forgive me, the Bible of the show. I wrote all the characters. I wrote all the backgrounds. I was involved in the casting, and I wrote season 1 of the show. And because Glow was such a big hit, I was able to get the star to do a movie with me, and that's how I got my first feature film made.
Wow, that's awesome.
See, we told you it was going to be a very special interview. Chris, we need to go home, though.
Man, it's been a long day.
Yeah.
Hey, you have a great week and don't tap out.